I flew 12 hours to surprise my husband, and before I crossed his cabin door, I learned my life had already been priced. This is not a love story. It is the story of how trust turned into strategy, how marriage became a calculation, and how a single overheard sentence split one life into before and after. My name is Sophia, my husband's name is David, and this is the moment everything began to unravel. David and I had been married for 2 years. On the surface, it was a clean, impressive marriage. He was ambitious, charming, always talking about the future. I came from money, though I rarely spoke about it. People said we balanced each other. I believed that. I believed in him. That belief is what brought me to the cabin. David told me he was going on a guy's weekend to a remote lake cabin. Poker, drinks, hiking, no wives. He said it casually, like it was a tradition older than our marriage. I smiled, nodded, and said I understood. But a week later, sitting alone in our too-large house, I booked a flight without telling him. I imagined his face when he saw me. I imagined laughter, embarrassment, his arms around me as he told his friends how lucky he was. The trip was a disaster. Delays, mechanical issues, long hours in crowded airports. I carried a single gift in my bag, his favorite bourbon, expensive and carefully wrapped. Every delay made the surprise feel more earned. By the time I reached the cabin grounds late at night, exhaustion mixed with excitement. The place was quiet, dark trees surrounding a wooden building glowing faintly from inside. I walked up to the door, adjusted the ribbon on the bottle, and lifted my hand to knock. That's when I heard David's voice through the thin wood. He sounded relaxed, comfortable, the way he sounded at home. "If she vanished," he said calmly, "the insurance money would clear everything." I didn't breathe, I didn't move. I stood frozen, my hand still raised, my smile still half-formed. Another voice laughed. Someone said something about finally being free. Another joke followed, careless and cruel. David answered them like this was a normal conversation, like they were discussing weather or cards, not my disappearance. The bourbon slipped slightly in my grip. My heart began to pound so hard I was sure they could hear it. I stepped back from the door without making a sound. The surprise was over. The marriage was over. I just didn't know yet how far this night would take me, or how dangerous the man inside truly was. I left the bottle by the door and walked into the dark, already understanding one thing with terrifying clarity. I was not supposed to hear that conversation. And now that I had, I could never go back. I didn't leave right away. I should have, but my body refused to move, as if stepping away would make what I'd heard real. I stayed close enough to the cabin to hear more, far enough that no one could see me through the windows. My pulse was loud in my ears. Every instinct told me to run. I ignored it. Inside, the conversation continued. "How much is it again?" one of the men asked. "2 million, David replied. "More if something happens after the policy adjustment goes through." Policy adjustment. The words landed heavier than the first sentence. This wasn't hypothetical. This wasn't a joke. This was planning. Another voice whistled. "That's a clean way out." David laughed softly. "Clean if you don't think too hard about it." Someone asked if I'd ever suspect anything. David didn't hesitate. "She trusts me, completely." That hurt more than the money, more than the word vanished. I pressed my back against a tree, fighting the urge to make a sound. My thoughts raced, but the fear was sharp and focused. I needed to hear everything. I needed to understand how long this had been going on. One of them mentioned my family. My father's name came up, followed by numbers that made my stomach turn. David talked about debts, about pressure, about how close everything was to collapsing. He didn't sound panicked. He sounded practical. "Accidents happen," he said. "People hike, people swim, people slip." Another laugh, someone added, "and then you'd be free." David paused, then casually, "Free and rich." There was a brief silence, broken by the clink of glasses. Then one of them said it, "And you could finally stop pretending about her sister." David didn't shut it down. He didn't defend me. He didn't even argue. "Let's not rush things," he said instead, "one problem at a time." My vision blurred. The night felt suddenly too quiet, too open. Every memory began replaying itself in a new light, every risky trip, every time he pushed me toward something I hesitated to do. I had always thought he wanted me to be braver. Now I wondered if he wanted witnesses. I realized something else then, something colder and more dangerous. They weren't worried I might hear them. They weren't worried because they never expected me to be there. That meant if I walked back into that cabin, if I announced myself, I wouldn't be a wife surprising her husband. I would be a complication. My hand closed tightly around the bourbon bottle. For a second, I considered smashing it against the cabin wall, bursting in, forcing them to look at me while their words still hung in the air. But shock faded into something clearer. I didn't want answers, I wanted control. Slowly, carefully, I placed the bottle on the porch near the door. I removed the ribbon. I made sure my name wasn't visible. Then I stepped away, each movement deliberate, silent, final. Behind me, my husband laughed again. Ahead of me was the dark road, my car, and a decision that would change everything. By morning, I would no longer be his wife. By morning, I would be missing. I drove for nearly an hour before my hands started shaking. Not panic clarity. The kind that comes when fear finishes screaming and leaves behind a cold plan. I pulled over once, just long enough to remove my wedding ring and drop it into the cup holder. I didn't cry, I didn't hesitate. The ring felt heavier than it should have, like evidence. I knew one thing for certain, I could not go home. David had access to everything, accounts, locations, routines. If he had been comfortable discussing my death with friends, then confronting him would not end in honesty. It would end in damage control. And I would be the problem he needed to eliminate. By the time the sky began to lighten, I had already decided to disappear. At the airport, I avoided eye contact. I didn't use my usual credit card. I booked the first one-way international flight, leaving within hours. I chose distance, not comfort, somewhere he wouldn't think to look, somewhere I could become unreachable before questions began. I bought a prepaid phone with cash, new number, no contacts except one, my assistant. When she answered, I didn't explain. I gave instructions, cancel everything, tell no one. If David asked, she hadn't heard from me since yesterday. She hesitated once. I ended the call. Then I turned off my main phone and removed the battery. On the plane, I stared straight ahead as memories surfaced uninvited. David insisting I sign insurance paperwork for our future. David suggesting dangerous trips, laughing when I hesitated. David talking about money like it was always just out of reach. Every moment rearranged itself into a pattern I didn't want to see, but couldn't unsee. When the plane lifted off, I felt something detach inside me. Not grief, awareness. I was no longer running from a bad marriage. I was moving away from a man who had already decided I was expendable. I landed under my maiden name. I checked into a small hotel with cash. I didn't unpack. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the door, listening for footsteps that weren't there. By the second night, messages would already be piling up. Calls unanswered. Concern turning into confusion. Confusion into suspicion. By the third day, David would realize something was wrong. And when he did, he wouldn't panic because he loved me. He would panic because his plan had lost its timing. I lay back and closed my eyes, understanding something with chilling certainty. I wasn't hiding. I was repositioning. And whatever David thought was coming next for me, it wasn't going to be easy anymore. By the fourth day, the silence around my name had become loud. I knew how this would unfold because David was predictable when control slipped. First, concern, then panic, then strategy. I stayed ahead of all three. I avoided places that asked questions. No social media, no familiar brands. No patterns. I paid in cash, moved locations once then again. Each move was intentional. Each delay widened the gap between who I was and who David thought I still was. On the fifth day, I checked my email for the first time. Over 100 messages, most from David. The subject lines changed as the hours passed. Where are you? Please answer. This isn't funny. I'm worried. The police are asking questions. That one made me pause. I opened it. David wrote that he'd reported me missing. He described me as stressed, overwhelmed, emotionally fragile. He suggested I might have needed space or acted impulsively. He framed himself as the confused, devoted husband. I recognized the language immediately. He was shaping the story. If I stayed gone long enough, the concern would shift. People would stop asking where I was and start asking what I'd done. A missing woman becomes suspicious faster than a grieving husband. I deleted the email and closed the laptop. That night, I replayed the cabin conversation again, but this time I listened like an outsider. Not a wife, not a victim, a witness. He hadn't sounded angry or desperate. He'd sounded calm. That meant this wasn't new. Plans like that don't begin in a weekend cabin. They grow quietly, fed by convenience and opportunity. Which meant there were probably documents, policies, transfers, evidence. The next morning, my phone rang on the prepaid line. I didn't answer immediately. I waited, let it ring again. When I picked up, I didn't speak. "Sophia," a woman whispered. I recognized the voice instantly. Rebecca, David's sister. Her voice was tight, controlled, like she was speaking from a locked room. "I don't know if this number is still yours. I don't know if you're alive, but if you are, you need to stay gone." My grip tightened on the phone. She continued. "Men came to the house last night, not police. They were looking for David. They said he owes them a lot of money. They know about you. They know about me." That explained the urgency, the recklessness, the insurance. This wasn't just betrayal. It was desperation layered over greed. "I shouldn't be calling," she said quickly, "but he's unraveling, and if you come back now." She stopped. "And if I don't?" I asked. There was a long pause, then quietly, "Then he won't know what to do next." The call ended. I sat there for a long time, phone still in my hand, understanding the shape of the danger more clearly now. David hadn't just planned for my absence. He had built his survival on it. And somewhere between the cabin and this moment, the power had shifted. He thought I was missing. I knew exactly where he was. And soon, I would decide what that meant for both of us. After Rebecca's call, I stopped pretending this was temporary. Up until that moment, disappearing had been about survival. Now it was about leverage. I needed facts, not memories, not suspicions. Proof. If David was already rewriting the story, then the truth had to be preserved somewhere he couldn't touch. I made one call, the only risky one I allowed myself. A private investigator my father had trusted for years. I didn't explain everything. I didn't need to. I said my husband had money problems, access to my finances, and a reason to lie. That was enough. "Start with insurance," I told him, "then accounts, then anything he's tried to hide." He didn't ask why. He said he'd call when he had something real. While I waited, I stayed still. No reactions, no messages. Silence was working. David couldn't threaten me if he didn't know where I was. He couldn't charm me if I didn't speak. 2 days later, the investigator called. "You were right," he said. "This wasn't impulsive." He found a second life insurance policy, larger than the one I knew about, taken out months after our wedding. My signature was there, but it wasn't mine. The beneficiary was David. That alone could destroy him. But it didn't stop there. Money had been moving quietly, small amounts at first, then larger, from our joint account into a private one under a shell name. Offshore, clean, intentional. He hadn't been losing money, he'd been storing it. "Anything else?" I asked. There was a pause. "Yes, and you're not going to like it." He found emails, drafts never sent, questions David had asked lawyers about what happened to my trust if I died, how long before assets transferred, whether accidental death raised flags. David hadn't been guessing. He had been preparing. I ended the call and sat in silence, letting the weight settle. There was no confusion left, no doubt. The man I married had been building an exit that required my disappearance. That night, I made a decision. I would not confront him yet. I would not expose him yet. I would let him believe his plan was still possible. Because men like David don't panic when they think they're winning. They panic when they realize the board has changed. And when that moment came, I wanted evidence, witnesses, and timing on my side. I sent one final message to Rebecca. "I'm alive, I'm safe, do not tell him, I'll handle this." She replied seconds later. "I trust you." That was enough. David thought I was missing. The truth was far more dangerous. I was watching. The waiting became deliberate. Every hour I stayed silent forced David to make choices without knowing where I stood. That uncertainty would push him to reveal himself faster than confrontation ever could. People under pressure make mistakes. David was already cracking. The investigator sent more updates. Gambling debts, not casual bets, serious money owed to serious people. Poker rooms that didn't exist on paper. Loans taken under false pretenses. Every lie he'd told me about business setbacks now had a name and a trail. That explained the urgency. The cabin conversation hadn't been fantasy, it had been a countdown. Then came the most disturbing discovery. David had been documenting me. Notes saved on a private drive. Dates, mood observations, comments about my stress levels, about how emotional I'd been lately, about arguments he'd intentionally provoked, then recorded as proof of instability. He was building a narrative where my disappearance wouldn't shock anyone. A woman under pressure, wealth, mental strain, a tragic decision. I closed the file and stared at the screen, feeling something harden inside me. This wasn't just betrayal. This was premeditation. That same evening, Rebecca called again. They came back, she whispered, not to my place, to his. That meant David hadn't paid yet, or couldn't. They asked about you, she continued, about whether you had family money that would move soon. Insurance. Even criminals were waiting on my death. I told her to stay away from him, to say nothing, to let him believe she knew nothing more than he did. She agreed without hesitation. After the call, I contacted my lawyer. I didn't ask what I should do. I told her what I was going to do. Freeze accounts, prepare divorce papers, secure evidence, quietly alert authorities, but not yet. Timing mattered. If David felt cornered too early, he'd run, or worse. By now, he believed two things. That I was gone. And that time was working in his favor. He was wrong on both counts. Late that night, I received an email from David. Short, controlled, careful. I just want to know you're safe. Whatever you're going through, we can fix it. Please come home. I deleted it without responding. The next message arrived an hour later. The police are asking harder questions now. If you're doing this to punish me, it's gone far enough. There it was, the shift, not concern, control slipping. I didn't reply. Because I knew the next phase was coming. And when it did, I would stop hiding. I would return, not as his wife, not as his victim, but as the person who knew exactly what he'd planned to do with my life. I chose the day carefully. Not too soon, not too late. David needed to believe he still had room to maneuver. That belief would keep him sloppy. I returned under my maiden name. Different hair, different clothes, nothing dramatic, just unfamiliar enough to delay recognition. I checked into a hotel 10 minutes from our house and watched from a distance. David looked worse than I expected. Unshaven, thinner. He paced when he talked, drank when he paused. The calm strategist from the cabin was gone. Pressure had replaced confidence, and pressure always exposes truth. That night, Rebecca texted once. He thinks the money will come through soon. Insurance optimism, delusion. I replied with one word. Good. The next morning I prepared everything. Copies of documents, recordings, divorce papers already signed by me, one envelope for the police, one for the insurance company, one for him. I didn't want chaos, I wanted containment. I drove to the house just before sunset. I didn't sneak in, I didn't circle. I parked where he could see the car. Then I rang the doorbell. Footsteps rushed toward the door. I could hear his breathing before he opened it. When David saw me, the color drained from his face so fast it was almost impressive. For a moment, he didn't speak. He just stared, like his mind couldn't decide whether I was real. His voice broke, you're alive. Yes, I said, that must be inconvenient. He reached for me out of instinct. I stepped back. What is this? He asked. Where have you been? The police. I know, I said. I've read your emails. That stopped him. I walked past him into the house. He followed, shutting the door behind us. His eyes never left me, like he was trying to calculate how this changed everything. I placed the envelope on the table. "What's that?" he asked. "Your exit," I said, "and your warning." He laughed once, sharp and nervous. "Sophia, whatever you think." "I heard you," I interrupted. "At the cabin, every word." Silence snapped into place. The mask slipped, not completely, but enough. "You misunderstood," he said quickly. "It was a joke, dark humor." I opened the envelope and slid the first document across the table. The forged insurance policy. Then the bank transfers. Then the notes. He didn't touch them, he didn't need to. "You planned my death," I said, calm, precise, "and you failed." His jaw tightened. "You don't have proof." I tapped the recorder in my pocket. "I do." That was when he finally understood. This wasn't a conversation. This was a reckoning. And it had only just begun. David sat down slowly, like gravity had suddenly increased. His confidence didn't shatter all at once. It cracked in stages, first denial, then calculation, then fear. "You don't want to do this," he said. "You'll ruin both of us." "No," I replied. "Only one of us gets ruined." He leaned back, studying me, searching for weakness. "You disappeared. No one knew where you were. That makes you unstable. You come back with accusations and paperwork, and you expect people to believe you." "I don't expect," I said. "I prepared." I slid another folder forward. Phone records, transaction logs, the investigator's summary. He didn't read them. He didn't have to. His silence confirmed everything. "You always were dramatic," he said finally. "You hear something out of context and spiral." "That might have worked before," I said. "It won't now." He stood abruptly. "You think you're safe? You think coming back here was smart?" That was the moment I'd been waiting for. "I didn't come back alone," I said, "and I didn't come back unprotected." I pressed a button on my phone. Across the room, his laptop chimed. An email opened automatically. His eyes widened as he read the subject line. "Notice of account review, immediate action required." His offshore account had been flagged. "You froze my money," he whispered. "Only what was stolen," I said. "The rest was never yours." He lunged toward me, stopped himself halfway. Rage flashed, then fear overtook it. "You can't prove intent," he said. "People joke, people vent, nothing happened to you." I met his eyes, "Because I heard you." The doorbell rang. David flinched. "I didn't." "That will be Rebecca," I said. "She knows everything now." He shook his head slowly. "You turned her against me." "No," I corrected. "You did." When Rebecca entered, she didn't look at him. She looked at the papers. At me. At the truth she had avoided for years. "This ends tonight," I said. "You sign the divorce, you leave, you never contact us again." "And if I don't?" David asked. I handed him the final envelope. "Then tomorrow morning, insurance investigators, federal agents, and your creditors all receive copies of everything." He stared at the envelope like it was a weapon. "Because it was." His voice dropped. "You wouldn't destroy me." I smiled. "You already tried to destroy me. I'm just choosing not to disappear quietly." His shoulders sagged. The fight drained out of him. He picked up the pen and signed. As the ink dried, I felt nothing. No victory, no relief. Just certainty. The man who planned my death had lost control of the story. And from this moment on, every move he made would be in reaction to me. David didn't speak after signing. Neither did I. Silence pressed down on the room, thick and final. This was the moment where men like him usually explode or beg. David did neither. He watched me, measuring consequences. "You think this is over," he said quietly. "For me it is," I replied. "For me," he said, standing slowly, "this is just damage." I picked up the signed papers and slid them back into my bag. "You'll leave tonight. You'll take nothing that isn't yours, and you won't try to find me." He laughed, low and bitter. "You really believe you can just walk away?" "Yes," I said, "because I already did." Another knock at the door cut through the tension. Not a doorbell this time, a knock that didn't wait for permission. David's eyes darted to the window. "That's not." "I know," I said calmly. "That's not me." The knock came again, harder. Rebecca stepped back instinctively. David's breathing changed, shorter, faster. "Who did you call?" he demanded. "I didn't," I said. "You did, with your debts, with your delays." The door opened before he could stop it. Two men stepped inside. They didn't look angry, they looked bored, professionals who'd done this before. "Evening," one of them said, eyes on David. "We were expecting a call." David swallowed. "I told you I needed more time." The man smiled thinly. "You said that yesterday." I moved closer to Rebecca, keeping my voice low. "Stay behind me." David glanced at me, panic breaking through. "You did this, you set this up." "No," I said. "You did, I just didn't save you from it." The men noticed me then. One of them raised an eyebrow. "Who's she?" David opened his mouth, closed it. "Not part of the deal," I said. "I'm leaving." The man nodded once. "Smart." I turned to David for the last time. He looked smaller now, cornered, exposed. "You wanted me gone," I said. "This is what that looks like." He said my name, sharp and desperate. I didn't answer. Rebecca and I walked out without running, without looking back. In the car, she finally spoke. "They won't kill him," she said. "I know," I replied, "but they'll strip him of every illusion he has left." Her hands trembled. "What happens now?" I started the engine. Now, the story finishes where it should have ended long ago. The house disappeared in the rearview mirror. David's world was no longer mine to manage. And for the first time since that cabin door, I felt something close to freedom, not because he lost, but because I survived him. I didn't follow the aftermath. I didn't wait to hear shouting, threats, or deals being made behind that door. I had learned something crucial about men like David. They destroy themselves far better than anyone else ever could. Rebecca stayed with me that night. She didn't ask questions I couldn't answer yet. She didn't defend him. That silence told me everything. Whatever illusion she had lived under was gone. By morning, news had already started moving quietly. Not headlines, whispers, banks freezing accounts, investigators requesting records, people who once returned David's calls instantly now letting them ring. I didn't contact the police. I didn't need to, others already had. My lawyer confirmed it by noon. Insurance fraud triggered mandatory review. Financial crimes units had opened files. Once that machine starts, it doesn't stop for charm or excuses. David tried calling me once. I let it ring. Then another number. I blocked it. The next attempt came through Rebecca's phone. She looked at the screen, then at me. "Don't answer," she said. "I won't," I replied. Because there was nothing left to say. By evening, he was gone from the house. Neighbors said he left in a hurry. No luggage, no goodbye, just absence. The same absence he'd planned for me. Only now, it belonged to him. 2 days later, I left the country again. Not in panic, not in secrecy. I traveled light, clean, legal, my name restored. My account secured. Every thread he'd wrapped around my life cut away. From a distance, updates filtered in. Creditors pressing, charges forming, former friends distancing themselves. People who once admired his ambition now careful to say they barely knew him. He tried to run, he always would. But running doesn't erase records. It doesn't erase documents. And it doesn't erase intent. Weeks later, I received one final message from an unknown number. "You think you won." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then deleted it. Because this was never about winning. It was about staying alive long enough to see the truth. David wanted my silence. Instead, he got exposure. He wanted my disappearance. Instead, he lost everything that made him dangerous. And as I stepped forward into a life he no longer had access to, I understood something simple and permanent. The most terrifying thing for someone who plans in the dark is a person who survives and remembers. And I remembered everything. The silence after David vanished should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt unfinished. Men like him don't disappear quietly. They wait. They look for angles. I assumed he would resurface, not to apologize, but to regain control in some other way. I was right. 3 weeks later, my lawyer called. "He's contesting the divorce," she said. "Claims coercion, says you threatened him." I laughed once, short, sharp. "Of course he does." He's also claiming you staged your disappearance to frame him. That was the move I'd expected. Reverse victim. Question my credibility. If he couldn't destroy me physically, he'd try legally. Let him, I said. What else? He's filed a complaint, suggesting you're mentally unstable and a danger to yourself. There it was, the narrative he'd been building for months. Good, I replied. That means he's scared. I authorized the next step. Within hours, my attorney released a controlled package, not public, not leaked, delivered directly to investigators. Audio recordings, forged documents, financial trails, the cabin recording. Not emotion, not accusations, evidence. David's legal strategy collapsed in a single afternoon. His lawyer withdrew. Then the insurance company formally accused him of fraud. Then came the arrest warrant. He tried to flee before it was executed. Border records flagged him. He was detained at an airport 2 states away with a false passport and undeclared cash. I didn't attend the hearing. I didn't watch the footage. I didn't need the image of him in handcuffs burned into my memory. What mattered was the shift. People stopped asking where I had gone. They started asking how long he had been lying. Rebecca visited me once after that. She looked lighter, freer. He still says you ruined him, she said quietly. I smiled. He ruined himself. I just survived long enough to watch. David pleaded not guilty. That didn't matter either. Because intent had been proven. Planning had been proven. The jokes, the policies, the timing. Men who joke about murder don't get the benefit of doubt when paperwork agrees with them. When the judge denied bail, something settled inside me. Not victory, finality. The threat was gone. Not erased, but contained. That night, I slept without checking the door. For the first time since the cabin, I slept without listening for footsteps that might never come. The story wasn't over. But the danger was. And that was enough to breathe again. The trial didn't need me in the room, but David needed me in his mind. That was unavoidable. Every motion his lawyers filed mentioned my name. Every defense circled back to me, my disappearance, my money, my silence. I had become the variable he could never control again. Evidence moved faster than arguments. The cabin audio was authenticated. The insurance forgery matched his handwriting patterns. The offshore transfers lined up with his gambling losses down to the day. There was no single mistake. There were hundreds. David tried to negotiate. Through intermediaries, through vague messages passed along by people who just wanted closure. He offered apologies that didn't name crimes, explanations that blamed pressure, promises that arrived too late. I ignored all of it. The most dangerous lie, he told, came during his deposition. She misunderstood, he said calmly. I loved my wife, I would never harm her. The prosecutor didn't raise his voice. He just slid a document across the table. A note David had written to himself months earlier. If something happens during the hike, don't panic. Let others speak first. That sentence ended his performance. From that moment, the case stopped being about suspicion and became about intent. The press never got full access. My name stayed mostly out of headlines. That was deliberate. I wanted the focus on his actions, not my escape. Still, I heard things. That he stopped sleeping. That he kept asking if I would testify. That he watched the courtroom doors, like I might appear at any moment. I never did. Rebecca told me later that was what broke him. Not the charges, not the evidence. The fact that I didn't need to face him to end him. When the verdict came, I was on another continent. Guilty. Fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. The sentencing date was set months out. It didn't matter. His future had already narrowed to numbers and walls. That night, I received one last letter from him, handwritten, smuggled through channels I didn't bother tracing. It said only one thing. You disappeared and destroyed me. I folded the letter once, then tore it in half. He had never understood the truth. I didn't disappear to destroy him. I disappeared so he couldn't destroy me. And in doing so, I took away the one thing he needed to survive, control. The story ended there for him. For me, it finally began. Freedom didn't arrive with relief. It arrived with awareness. Once David was locked into a future he couldn't manipulate, I expected the tension to fade. It didn't. It sharpened. Because danger doesn't always come from the person you defeat. Sometimes it comes from what they leave behind. 2 weeks after the verdict, my investigator called again. "There's something you need to know," he said. "David wasn't working alone." That sentence erased whatever calm I'd built. He explained quickly. During the financial deep dive, another name kept appearing. Not on official documents, not on accounts. Someone David owed favors to. Someone who helped move money quietly before the gambling spiraled out of control. A fixer. Not a friend, not a creditor. A man who specialized in problems that needed to disappear. "Did he know about me?" I asked. "Yes," the investigator said, "and he's unhappy the payout never came." That changed everything. David had planned my death as a solution, but someone else had expected it as a transaction. And transactions don't vanish just because one party is arrested. "Where is he now?" I asked. "Unknown," he replied, "but he's been asking questions." I didn't panic. Panic wastes time. I asked one question instead. "Does he know I'm alive?" There was a pause, not officially. That meant I still had a lead. I changed locations again. New routes, new routines, no patterns. I contacted my lawyer and transferred authority temporarily. If anything happened to me, every document would be released automatically. No delays, no discretion. Then I waited. 3 nights later, I received a message on my prepaid phone. No number, just text. "You caused a loss." I didn't respond. Another message followed. "Losses get corrected." Still nothing from me. The third message came just before dawn. "You should have stayed gone." That one wasn't a threat. It was confirmation. I forwarded the messages to my investigator and authorities simultaneously. I didn't block the number. I wanted him to believe I was still reachable. Because now, this wasn't about escape. It was about drawing him out. David's story had ended in a courtroom. This one was just beginning. And unlike David, this man didn't want money. He wanted closure. Which meant I needed to make sure I controlled where and how that happened. I didn't tell Rebecca. I didn't tell my sister. Fear spreads faster than facts, and I needed clear minds around me. I handled it the same way I'd handled David, quietly, deliberately, without emotion. The fixer sent nothing for 2 days, then he slipped. A single mistake, a location ping hidden inside a message link. He wanted me curious. He wanted me scared enough to tap. I tapped. That was all the investigator needed. He wasn't a ghost. He was a man who believed his reputation protected him. He operated in gray spaces, collecting favors, debts, and silence. David had been one of many careless clients. I was just the one who hadn't died on schedule. Authorities moved slowly on purpose, letting him think he was unseen, letting him get comfortable. Meanwhile, he kept messaging. "You think the system saved you?" It didn't. People disappear every day. I never replied. Silence had always been my advantage. Then the messages stopped. That was worse. Because predators don't go quiet when they're done. They go quiet when they're close. I altered plans again. New hotel, new exit routes. I kept my phone on, volume high. If he wanted attention, he wouldn't get it. If he wanted proximity, he'd have to expose himself. 2 nights later, I saw him. Not clearly, not close, but enough. He sat at a cafe across the street pretending to read. Same time, same seat, 2 days in a row. Watching. I didn't confront him, I didn't run. I walked past him on the 3rd day and let our eyes meet for half a second. No anger, no threat. Recognition. That night, he sent one final message. "You're not worth the trouble." By morning, he was gone. Authorities confirmed it later. He'd been picked up quietly on unrelated charges, old cases, old patterns. Mine had simply brought him into the light. I never heard from him again. The danger ended not with violence, but with exposure. Just like David. Months later, I understood something fully for the first time. I hadn't survived because I was lucky. I survived because I paid attention. Because I listened when people thought I couldn't hear. Because I chose silence over emotion, timing over impulse, truth over comfort. The cabin door had opened one story. It closed another. And nothing, no threat, no man's, no plan, would ever take my life from me again. When the danger finally ended, I didn't celebrate. I waited. Experience had taught me that endings like to pretend they're finished before they actually are. Months passed. David remained in custody, his case dragging through appeals that went nowhere. The fixer vanished from every system that mattered. No more messages. No more shadows. Still, I stayed alert. Survival rewires you. It doesn't let you relax easily. Then something unexpected happened. The insurance company contacted my lawyer. Not with questions, with an apology. They confirmed everything: fraud, forged signatures, manipulated policy changes. David's actions had triggered internal audits across multiple cases. He hadn't just targeted me. I had been the largest prize, not the first. That changed the scope. Victims came forward quietly. Other women, other marriages, different endings, some lucky, some not. Patterns emerged. The cabin conversation wasn't unique, it was routine. David hadn't planned my death because he hated me. He planned it because it worked. That realization was colder than any threat. Authorities expanded the case. New charges followed. His name stopped being whispered and started being documented. Every lie he told me now lived permanently in public record. I received another message then, not from him. From a woman I didn't know. I was married to him before you. I saw the trial. I thought I was crazy. Thank you. I stared at the screen for a long time. I hadn't meant to become proof for anyone else, but truth has weight. Once released, it doesn't stop with one person. That night, I understood something important. David's power had never come from intelligence or charm. It came from silence. Women doubting themselves, choosing peace over questions, believing explanations that felt wrong because challenging them felt harder. I broke that silence by accident. I kept it broken on purpose. The story no longer belonged to him. It didn't even belong to me. It belonged to the record now. And records don't forget. I closed my laptop and stepped outside, breathing evenly, listening to nothing but my own thoughts. For the first time since the cabin, they were quiet. No countdowns. No shadows. No voices planning around me. Just certainty. I was alive because I listened. I stayed alive because I acted. And nothing, no love, no fear, no history, would ever convince me to ignore that instinct again. I thought the story was finished. I was wrong. Closure is never announced. It tests you one last time. The call came late, from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. Almost. Instinct made me answer. "This is Detective Harris," the voice said. "We need to ask you about something David did that never made it into the case." My grip tightened. What kind of something? A contingency. That word mattered. They had found a storage unit registered under a false name. Inside were documents, burner phones, and a sealed envelope labeled with my maiden name. It had been dated weeks before the cabin trip. "He planned for failure," the detective said, "for the possibility that you didn't die." I closed my eyes. What was in the envelope? A pause. Instructions. David had written a step-by-step plan. If I vanished and the insurance paid, he would move money and disappear. If I vanished and returned, he would discredit me. And if I survived and Asterisk fought back, he had arranged something else. A secondary narrative. A suicide letter drafted in my handwriting. Medical records he'd altered. Messages prepared to be released, framing me as unstable, paranoid, dangerous to myself. He never used it, the detective said, but it was ready. That was the final truth. David hadn't reacted to losing control. He had prepared for it. The detective asked if I wanted the envelope destroyed. "No," I said, "I want it archived." Because lies rot when they're hidden. They survive when they're buried. After the call, I sat very still. The danger was gone, but the realization landed heavier than anything before. I hadn't escaped a bad man. I had escaped a system he built around me. That night I wrote everything down. not for court, not for justice. For myself. Every decision, every silence, every moment where instinct spoke louder than fear. I understood something then that I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. The scariest part wasn't that he planned my death. It was how calmly he believed he could explain it away afterward. The next morning, I made one final change. I closed the last open account tied to my married name. I cut the final administrative thread. Nothing connected me to David anymore. Not legally. Not financially. Not psychologically. Some endings don't arrive with noise. They arrive with certainty. And certainty is final. This was mine. After the envelope, I stopped assuming safety meant distance. Distance hadn't protected me before, awareness had. I changed how I lived, not where, but how. No routines. No habits that repeated long enough to be predicted. I didn't disappear again. I became unreadable. Weeks later, another development surfaced, quietly, the way dangerous things usually do. A financial analyst connected to the investigation flagged a delayed transaction. One that hadn't cleared because David had been arrested too early. Money that was supposed to move after my death. The amount was small compared to the rest. That's why it mattered. Large sums attract attention, small ones slip through. The account wasn't in David's name, it wasn't in the fixer's either. It belonged to a woman. Not a lover. An executor. Someone whose job was to act if everything else failed. The investigator called it what it was, a dead man's switch. If David went down and I stayed silent, the money would move. If I spoke, it would trigger a second release. Documents, accusations, carefully timed leaks meant to damage my credibility publicly. David hadn't expected to win forever. He'd expected mutual destruction. Can it still activate? I asked. Yes, the investigator said, but only if you're alive and visible. That was the point. I was supposed to be forced into hiding again, to choose between silence and chaos. I didn't choose either. I authorized a controlled disclosure. Not dramatic, not emotional. A clean legal filing acknowledging my disappearance, my return, and the existence of falsified material prepared without my consent. Preemptive, boring, impossible to twist. The switch never triggered. Without mystery, it had no power. The executor vanished from the process the same day. No payment, no release, no leverage. For the first time since the cabin, every contingency collapsed at once. David had planned layers. He hadn't planned resistance that refused spectacle. That night, I slept without backup phones charging, without escape routes mapped, without listening for threats that didn't exist anymore. Because the last weapon he had wasn't violence. It was narrative. And I had taken that from him too. Some stories end loudly. This one ended because there was nothing left to tell. With every contingency dismantled, I expected quiet. Instead, I got one final test. It came disguised as routine. My lawyer forwarded a notice from the court, an administrative delay, one document missing from the archive, a signature mismatch, small enough to overlook, big enough to reopen questions. David's name was on it. Not as a defendant. As a witness. He had offered information in exchange for leniency, a last move, not against the system, against me. The claim was simple. I had orchestrated everything. The disappearance, the evidence, the pressure. He painted himself as reckless but manipulated, a man pushed into desperation by a wife who wanted control. It was clever, almost believable. Almost. What he didn't know was that his offer triggered a requirement. He had to speak. On record. Under oath. I agreed to let it happen. The deposition was brief, controlled, no theatrics. David spoke carefully at first, choosing words like stepping stones. He described my coldness, my distance, my fixation on money. He framed the cabin conversation as exaggeration, bravado taken out of context. Then the questions narrowed. Timelines, dates, transfers. He contradicted himself twice. Then 3 times. When presented with the forged documents, he denied knowledge, until confronted with metadata he hadn't known existed. When asked about the envelope labeled with my maiden name, he said it was insurance. When asked why it was dated before the cabin trip, he stopped speaking. Silence stretches longer under oath. The final question ended it. Did you ever believe your wife's death would solve your financial problems? David hesitated. Just long enough. Yes, he said quietly, I thought it would. That was it. The offer was withdrawn immediately. No leniency, no negotiation. When the recording ended, I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt release. Because the truth didn't need my voice anymore. It spoke through his. Later that night, my lawyer called one last time. It's done, she said, there's nothing left to reopen. I thanked her and ended the call. I didn't look back at documents, I didn't revisit evidence, I didn't replay recordings. I understood something final then. The danger wasn't that David planned my death. The danger was that he believed he could survive the truth. He couldn't. And neither could the story he built around me. This time, the ending didn't wait. It arrived. And stayed. The world didn't reset after David's final failure. It adjusted. News of his last statement never reached the public, but it traveled where it mattered. Investigators closed files. Banks sealed accounts. Insurance companies rewrote internal rules because of him. His name became a reference point, not a person. That was his legacy. Mine was quieter. I changed nothing abruptly. No announcements, no visible rebirth. People expected drama at the end of stories like mine. They didn't get it. I let the silence confuse them. One afternoon, my lawyer called with the final update. Sentencing is complete, she said. No appeal, no delays. I asked one question, did he mention me? No, she replied. He mentioned money, time, betrayal, not you. That told me everything. Even at the end, David still believed this was about loss, not choice. He never understood that I didn't take something from him. I stepped out of his reach. That same evening, I received a message from an unfamiliar email address. No greeting, no signature. I should have listened to you. It was from someone connected to one of his earlier cases. Another woman, another almost story. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't care, but because my role was finished. Survival doesn't require explanation. Rebecca visited me once more before moving on with her life. She didn't talk about her brother. She talked about herself, about plans, about relief. Before she left, she said something that stayed with me. He always needed someone to carry the weight of his choices. You dropped it. She was right. The danger ended not when he was arrested, or sentenced, or exposed. It ended when no one was willing to protect him anymore. That night I packed light. One bag, no documents, no backups, just intention. I wasn't running. I was choosing where the story stopped following me. And where I finally walked alone, unfollowed, unafraid, and completely out of his reach. Only one part remained. The part where I lived. The last part of the story didn't arrive with noise. No sirens, no headlines, no moment where the world acknowledged what I'd survived. That was fine. I didn't need witnesses anymore. I left quietly again, but this time by choice, not fear. David was sentenced. His name faded into files, then footnotes. People moved on fast when the threat was gone. I stayed alert long enough to be sure nothing followed me. Nothing did. One night, months later, I received a notification from the court system. Automatic, impersonal. Case closed. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, then locked the phone and turned it off. That was the final confirmation. Not emotional, not symbolic, just fact. I walked outside into the dark, aware of every sound, every movement, then realizing I didn't need to be anymore. No one was waiting for me to slip. No one was planning around my absence. No one needed me dead to survive. The danger wasn't hiding. It was finished. I thought back to the cabin door, the moment my life split in two, how close I had been to knocking, to smiling, to stepping into a future where I wouldn't have understood the rules until it was too late. That single pause had saved me. Not luck. Timing. Listening. Choosing not to announce myself. I didn't rebuild my old life. I didn't reclaim it. I let it stay behind, exactly where it failed me. I kept nothing from that marriage except the knowledge it gave me. That knowledge stayed sharp. Trust slower. Instinct louder. And silence, when needed, absolute. Somewhere far away, David would wake every morning knowing the plan he built never worked. Knowing the person he thought he controlled had walked away with the only thing that mattered. Awareness. I didn't disappear. I outlived the version of me he planned for. And that was the ending he never accounted for. The story stops here. Not because there's nothing left to tell, but because nothing is chasing me anymore. You have reached the end of the text.